All right, looks like the last few people trickled in. So thanks so much for joining us today. Who would have known so many of you are passionate about onboarding and KYC? So on that note, like I said, today we're going to be discussing onboarding programs, specifically those that don't make your customers tear their hair out. So by way of introduction, my name's Kristen Cooper. I work at Airwallex as a senior enterprise account manager. Have a background in sales, living in the Bay Area. But my day-to-day role at Airwallex generally entails answering customer questions, maintaining and growing the relationship, as well as hosting QBRs, and most importantly, ensuring that our enterprise customers and our MFI customers specifically have a delightful and pleasant onboarding experience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Meet. Lead the US Solutions Engineering team at Airwallex. My team works very closely with the customers who use our APIs to embed financial capabilities into their end product. Work very closely with the customers to understand their use case, understand their technical requirements, and come up with a solution that's easy to integrate and that scales as the business grows. I'm a software engineer at heart, and by qualification, I love working with engineers, developers, get their feedback, work on real-life problems, and improve the product in the end.
Great. So as I had mentioned, we both come from Airwallex. Airwallex is a complete end-to-end payments platform that allows our customers to use our APIs to offer financial services to their end customers. We allow them to collect, hold, convert, and spend that money within the platform, empowering them to grow beyond borders. So true global kind of vision. We have 20 locations globally and about 1,500 employees. As I mentioned, we empower our customers, like I said, complete end-to-end solution. So a little bit more about who we are and what we do, but I think the main focus of this slide is in order for our customers to do any of these things, it requires them to onboard. And so making sure they are successfully onboarded and have a great experience so they can actually start using some of the products that they bought with us. So today we'll be talking a little bit more through what onboarding is, why it's important, why it matters, as well as some of the risks that we've seen in getting it wrong, some of the benefits of getting it right. Then we'll dive a little bit further into Airwallex's own journey, how we built and bought our solution, some of the things that we considered, some hallmarks of a great onboarding program that we kind of staked our program against. And then we'll go into our learnings. What are some of the things that we learned along the way? How has our solution developed over time? And then what's next? Where are we headed with our onboarding program in the future? So on that note, I'll dive a little bit further into exactly what is onboarding, right? I'm setting the stage here. So kind of two processes. One that refers to more of the internal or KYC element, which is validating customer identity, making sure your customer is who they say they are, making sure you want to work with them as a business, or maybe you don't. And then the external facing definition is the customer's experience of getting them up and running on the product. So why does this all matter? Why are we here today? Why are we talking about this? From an internal perspective, getting KYC and onboarding right really has to do a lot with risk mitigation, compliance with KYC, AML policies, procedures, avoiding any financial or reputational damage. From a customer perspective, this is the first time you get to delight the customer, first time they come into your solution, first time they're interacting with your organization. It sets the tone for the relationship. It provides credibility and trust for your organization if done properly. And we'll talk about in a couple of slides, can really help drive that adoption and usage from the get-go. So some of the risks of getting it wrong. As we've seen in the news lately, a lot of organizations, banks, financial institutions have come under a lot of fire for not adhering to KYC and AML policies and procedures. Not only causing reputational damage, but I don't know about you, 186 million is not a small number to me. So being able to get it right, on the other hand, can actually significantly increase the usage in your platform. So the analysis that we've done with some of our enterprise customers is we found that the length of time it takes for a customer to pass KYC is the single largest factor in determining the likelihood that they will successfully ramp, meaning that they will get into the platform and start transacting immediately. So being able to provide an experience that is not only streamlined and efficient, as you can see, is pretty important for the adoption of your program. So diving a little bit more into our approach, how did we think about this at Airwallex? What were some of the considerations that we talked about, thought through? The main question was, do we build it or do we buy it? And some of the questions that we asked ourselves is, in terms of building and buying, right, is can we build this better than an existing provider? Can we build this cheaper than an existing provider? Is this a core competency that fits well within our other product offerings? For us, that answer was definitely yes, right? We have a global solution, and we want a kind of complete end-to-end process for our customers. Is it scalable? Or better yet, how do we make it scalable? Can this give us some kind of advantage in some way against our customers if we build it in-house? Ultimately, what we chose was a combination of the two, a sort of hybrid approach.
Yeah, and like most products that we build today, it has a dependency on various systems, and there are some things that you build in-house. The build versus buy debate, it's not new. It has been going on since decades and will continue. And usually the ideal solution is something hybrid, build and buy. That's somewhere in the middle. And that's what fits with fintechs of most shapes and sizes. You decide what you want to own long-term, what you have the expertise in. That's the things that you build in-house. The remaining, you can leverage someone else's dependency. That's how you can build the best customer experience in terms of onboarding. On the right-hand side, we have this is our architecture in terms of onboarding. The key thing to note here is you have to consider onboarding as a product. It's not a workflow or a feature that you just do it and get the customers to the actual product. It is part of the product. It is the first thing that they see once they sign up. When we were designing our onboarding product, we were focusing on three main problems. The first one was, how can we onboard as many businesses in as many regions, countries as possible? Because if you onboard a business in a country, it has a completely different requirement than onboarding another business in a different country. Because all the country-specific regulations, requirements, the way they draft any business, how they're registered with the local authorities. So that was the first problem. The second is, how do you still provide a uniform API interface? The API interface is the topmost section, the block. We use APIs for our own first-party customers. They use our web app and our mobile application to sign up, and that uses our own internal API, kind of dog fooding. And we have platforms who onboard their own customers. They integrate with our API directly. So that's single main point. And how do we provide a uniform API interface that works to onboard businesses across different countries, knowing all the fragmented business structures that are possible? And the third most important part was providing the local customized experience. If a customer is onboarding a business in the US, they should feel that they're onboarding a business in the US, because they may need to provide SSN, they may need to provide some license number. Whereas if you're onboarding a business in Germany or in Australia, they may have a completely different terminology, business registration numbers. They should feel more local when they're onboarding their business. So it's how do you build a global product that works in a localized way, to streamline the local experience? Those were the three problems we were tasked to solve it. And this is the architecture that looks behind the scenes. On the bottom part, we have integrated with regional vendors. That's where you see region 1, 2, 3. Every time we can make our financial services available in a new region, we would work with the local vendors, the data registries, the business registries, and we would come up with a new web service that would get the data, auto-populate that into our database. The customers don't have to provide it. Who likes to fill up a long, boring form and upload all the documents? No one. So we just want the key information from the customer and then populate all that information from the local registry, business information, so customer doesn't have to onboard it. The next layer is where we add some business logic. To onboard a company, a business, usually we need to do some business verification. We need to onboard their ultimate beneficial owners, that's the UBO. We need to do some ID verifications, the liveness checks. Is the person who is going through the experience, they are live, they're present there. And the last is name screening. That's the business logic. On top of it is we have the data aggregation and hydration layer. Because we collect data from several sources, some of the key inputs are provided by the customer itself, some of the data is being sourced from the regional vendors. That's where we combine all the data and put together a whole business profile that gives us a good idea on what that business is, where is the entity, what is the risk. And the most important part is the orchestration and the decisioning layer that looks at that whole business profile and decides what is the risk of onboarding that business. Is it safe? Is it in a restricted country or a business? That's the one that scores it. If all the automated rules succeed, it would just approve the customers and they're onboarded. But if it's not, it goes through a manual process, and that's where the decisioning layer comes in. That's where it combines all the information and puts a full picture. And on top of it is the application layer. We already talked about API layer. Monitoring is important. We continuously monitor our businesses to ensure they remain compliant. We have to do regular audits. How do we ensure that a business that some of the documents may be expired? How do we go and ask the customers to upload their new businesses? So that's in a nutshell our architecture. We have the internal tooling to help our internal employees and the risk engine that does the scoring. To go back to the build and buy debate, so the bottom two layers is where we are relying on a lot of data experts and the registries and the name screening that we get from government agencies. That's the third party, the buy part. And anything on top is the build part, where we have invested engineering product resources to ensure we build something that works for our customers, the things that we want to emphasize on.
Great. So now that we learned a little bit about how we took our approach as hybrid to build versus buy, now we have to put some main pillars into place of the hallmarks of an excellent onboarding program and really align internally on what exactly the experience we want to look like, and the things to build our solution around. So what we see on the right-hand side over here is what we've determined as hallmarks of an excellent onboarding program. First and foremost, I would say user experience. And this is really heavily rooted in our general overview of products and how we handle our customers. It's a part of our blueprint of our company. So really, I would say customer user experience is paramount here, and the rest all play into that. So making sure there's clear expectations set with the customers, defining very clear SLAs for your onboarding program. How are you communicating that to your customers? How are you setting the right expectations up front in the sales cycle or post-sales, right? How are you setting the proper expectations? And ensuring that there is global support and coverage if you're looking to build a global program like we are. Ensuring there's regional expertise for understanding local laws, regulations, et cetera. Balancing the automation versus manual, which we'll get into in just a second. How do you determine what companies may be able to onboard it pretty quickly, and others that maybe need a little bit more checks under the hood. And then lastly, integration flexibility, integration options, making sure that you're catering to the different needs of your customers and how they can integrate with your solution. So let's take a look how we built our solution to accomplish these. So as I had talked about customer experience, here's just a brief snapshot of our web application that shows some of the ways we've made some small tweaks and improvements to improve the customer experience. First and foremost, you can see on the left-hand side, depending on the region that they're onboarding, being able to enable them with a smart company search, auto-populate, pre-populate the information that we have from the vendors that we bought, information around their business. As we talked about, the speed to KYC and KYC pass is a very large factor in ensuring that adoption. So enabling our customers to get through the application quicker, leveraging the information we have, is one way that we've helped enhance that customer experience. I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but trying to find a balance of where you can leverage automation and AI versus where maybe you need to take a little bit more manual approach. So a lot of this is risk policies, procedures that our compliance team has created policies around, specifically our global acceptable use policy. What are the organizations that we want to work with, maybe low or medium risk? What are some that require a little more information around higher risk customers? And what is absolutely outside of our risk? What are our companies that maybe we don't want to work with? For those that fall in the lower and medium risk category, we've done automation and AI through what we call our straight-through processing flow, which processes the application within seconds. It has very clear KYC geo-specific requirements, auto-enriches the data, and really provides that smooth experience for the customers. What we've determined requires a bit more manual approach is our customers that fall into some of those higher risk categories. Maybe something that or what we call restricted. We need a little bit more information in order to work with the business. So these are not auto-passed. They they trigger a manual review with a multi-level approach and ultimately get compliance sign-off. So we feel confident that our head of compliance has reviewed the application. We feel comfortable working with this business moving forward. I'll have Meet talk a little bit about our integration flexibility options.
Cool. So let's say you talked a lot about how it works behind the scenes, what architecture we follow, what internal processes we have, what automations, what cannot be automated. The slide focuses on how do you collect the information from the customers to even trigger that KYC. You need to understand, you need to know who are you onboarding. And in order to do that, we have worked with customers who need different options, and flexibility is the key there. There are some customers who wants to fill up a form because it's just one business that they're onboarding and they're fine. They're just going to onboard one, and this is a one-time process. It's not you're going to do it every day, so they are okay with just filling up a form. We also work with platforms who onboard thousands of businesses in a week or a month span of time. So in that case, filling up a form may not be the ideal choice. They may have already collected the information from those customers. But they may not have all the information. In that case, they need something more efficient and fast rather than a human filling up a form. So in order to cater for those different requirements, we have a few different options. And it's not something new. Some of these options have already been existing in the industry, but it's really important to ensure that we have these options available. The first one, hosted onboarding, is for those set of customers who are okay filling up the form, and it's really for the platforms who wants to onboard our third-party customers. They show up a form, the end customers fill up the form, and they click submit, and then it comes in our queue. That's the easiest to integrate with, no developer or very zero to no developer engineering work required there, and it allows you to fastest to go live for your platforms. The second one, onboarding component, it requires a little bit of engineering work because it embeds the hosted onboarding flow within an iframe, and platforms can embed it in their own product. They don't have to do a full-page redirect to Airwallex or your company. So it does require a little bit of engineering work, but it still leverages a lot of UI rendering part that we have already done, and we invest every day in order to ensure that's optimized for all the countries that we support business onboarding in. And the last one provides the most flexibility in terms of user experience. If someone wants, let's say there's a platform who have already had thousands of business, they already have partial information collected, but now they want to embed more financial capabilities. In that case, they only need a little bit of extra information. They don't need to show them a whole form of 3 sections. They can already ingest that information they already have via our API, and they can render an additional form just to capture that 2 pieces of information that they don't have. So users don't spend time filling up that form, but they just type in those 2 fields, and that completes the whole profile, and they can submit. Many customers, they have also used native API to ingest data via spreadsheets. People love filling information, thousands of data in spreadsheet, and write a script to just call API and onboard businesses at a bulk. So that's where it's really important to have integration flexibility, and depending on your engineering effort, prioritization, your skill sets, you can choose a host of options, and the customers love that optionality. We do recommend hosted onboarding and onboarding component because that way we as Airwallex takes the responsibility of maintaining the UI, ensure we are compliant, the businesses that we onboard them in a compliant manner. Whereas with native API, you'll have to constantly be aware of new API versions. If there is a new business requirement, let's say in Australia, you may have to make some changes in the UI to ensure you collect that additional information. Great, so flexibility is the key.
And just one more thing to add on this slide. I think the majority of our customers, majority of my customers use the onboarding component because it kind of strikes the balance between being able to customize, but also having a little bit more a uniform and structured way to ensure the right information is provided. I've also seen customers that start with the onboarding component and then eventually move to native API. So again, being able to provide the different flexibility, different integration options based on your customers' needs is really important. And that can change over time too. So being able to grow with the business as well is also super important and something that having multiple options like this can really give itself to. So one of the other pillars that we kind of touched on a little bit in the beginning, it goes hand in hand with the next slide, is we took a global approach to our onboarding program and product. We needed to ensure that there was regional support, that these local experts were familiar with laws, regulations, and having folks in each of those regions that really know the requirements has been tremendous help in getting our MFI customers onboarded properly. A lot of our questions have customers that are customers in different regions. So let's say we onboard a customer in the US, they're a platform customer, but they're looking to onboard customers in EU or Singapore or Australia. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm certainly not well informed in Australian law. So being able to lean on some of those professionals in different regions, even get them directly connected with our customers to provide additional context and feel well informed so they can then give that information to their customers has really created a positive experience for a lot of our enterprise customers. So this kind of goes hand in hand with regional nuances in addition to having that support. Also from an AML compliance, you need to make sure that you're handling each region and each application specific to where that customer is trying to onboard. As you can see, some kind of extreme examples for cannabis, but it just kind of exemplifies, the difference between onboarding a customer in Canada and maybe the risk appetite from the banking partners and companies there versus ones that are in APAC, right, where you looks like could potentially get the death penalty. Data protection, I think that's one we're all pretty aware of, GDPR specific to EMEA. And then gambling, a lot of sensitivities around that in the U.S., supporting those businesses from a banking perspective, banking relationship perspective, versus some of the licenses that we've received through our entity in the U.K. that allows us to maybe be a little bit more flexible with some additional gathering of additional information from our customers to support. That kind of wraps up the pillars that we wanted to share with you guys around things to consider as you build an onboarding program. Now we'll dive a little bit further into our learnings. What were some of the mistakes we made early on? How did we rectify? And then we'll go into optimizations. How do we learn from our mistakes? And then what are we looking at into the future?
How many people do we have in the room from engineering or technical background? Can you just guys raise hands? Okay, good amount. Okay, all right, so I feel good about talking about APIs and going into the details there. What are humans great at? They're good at learning from their mistakes. And since the day we launched our onboarding programs, we have been working on our APIs. We are very much API-first company. And we even, for our web application for first-party customers, we leverage our own API for some of the cases. And if you were to bundle those improvements that we have done on the API side, you can bundle them into 3 versions. V1 was the first version, and some of the classic mistakes that engineers do is over-engineer. When we start fresh, we want to build a generic API that works across all cases, all businesses, all countries. That's what happened here. We came up with a dynamic API schema to kind of avoid writing the documentation. to onboard a business in a country. We were completely hoping that the dynamic API schema would act as a self-service documentation. So the top screenshot that you see is create an account, you give in the entity type that you want to onboard, is it business, individual, you talk about, you provide the country where you onboard that business, you want to provide which industry category, and then we would give you a huge payload that will give you a list of requirements that you need to collect from the customers in order to onboard in that country with that structure. So now you can imagine all the permutations and combinations that may happen. As a result of that, the API was really good. Didn't have to write any documentation, but it was really hard to code against. The front-end engineers hated it because they have to deal with a lot of customizations, front-end validations. These are not JavaScript validations that you do on form, but they are really business validations. In the US, you need to collect this document, whereas in Australia, you need to collect a completely different document. So it was really hard to code against, and internally, we were also hoping we're facing issues with maintaining it, because anytime there is a new requirement, the laws change, we need a new document to collect, we would have to bump up the version number, or we have to decide, is it really a backward compatible versus okay to release in the existing version. So those are the problems with V1. So V2 is where we kind of worked on that improvements. We relaxed the front-end validations. Our API stopped doing the business validations on which country, what documents you need. We removed that API validations, but we put those validations on the back end, where we would accept the payload as is, and once the KYC is in the review phase, if there's any information that's missing, that's where we will do a follow-up query, kind of a request for more information. So that helped, that allowed the front-end engineers have the flexibility to design the UI that caters to the local country and streamline the user experience. That's how we were able to focus more on the customer experience versus building the backend, which no one really uses. But still, we had an issue with V2. Our API schema was not generic. How can we still make a little bit of standardization? That's where we came up with V3, where we standardized the data structures. We have a few data structures, let's say in China or in some other countries, the business roles, they are called directors or controllers, whereas in the US, those terminologies are not used. It's a completely different. We say ultimate beneficial owners. So it's completely different roles. So we standardize those data structures. On the right-hand side, the lower screenshot, you would see account details. Within it, we have a generic data structures business person, and we came up with roles. So you assign what business that person is assigned the role. That's how we standardize the data structures. We had to write a lot of documentation to explain what rules are there for a country. But again, this is also for the complex platforms who want to onboard thousands of customers in an API manner. So it's really, the crux is, it's a balance between standardization versus customization. And you need to find that balance depending on what you are building for, who are your target customers. It's a good combination between how flexible your API can be and how local, how customized you want the UX user experience to be.
So now we know where we've come from and where we are today. When we look at getting there, some of the questions that we had to ask ourselves in order to learn, right? You have to be able to track things in order to make improvements. So what were some of the data points that we started to pull early on that were really instrumental in helping us actually move forward and optimize a lot of these processes? So things like RFI rates. I know RFI is a dirty word, but to some degree unavoidable, right? And for those of you that don't know, RFI is a request for information. So let's say a customer has onboarded and we require additional information, something was incomplete, we would send what we call an RFI, the request for information. So tracking RFI rates, right? What does that look like overall? What are some of our top RFI categories? Are we sending multiple RFIs? Is there a chance for the wording in the RFI that we're sending to the wording to be improved, so it's a little clearer understanding from our customers of what we're looking for? Time to go live. We talked about this at the beginning. Time from KYC submission to successful pass. How does that impact the go live? How long does it take once they're onboarded to actually start transacting. And page load times, API latencies. Meet actually had a pretty good story from a customer this morning asking about API latency and why it's important. So I'll let him speak to that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share this live. We had a customer call in the morning where they were going to use the hosted onboarding flow, so they would make their customers go through the whole flow, but then they asked, and the kind of customers they onboard, they're really big. They're complex businesses with different ownership structures, business structures. Now, how do we onboard them? And it's really, the form is small, but you need to provide a bunch of documentation, which you may not be handy. The moment you start filling up a form, you don't have that documents. You're probably just looking for what you need to provide. And they were asking, it's really a pain point for us to know or to nudge our customers to finish the form. It's just like a classic sign-up experience. If it's a huge form, customers drop. The more UI interaction, they drop. So it's really important to track the API latency to understand how fast the UI is loading for them. That's the page load. The API latency is more on the inside. The other metrics that they were looking for is client-side metrics. You want to emit events. This is for the engineering folks. You want to emit events on what the customer is doing and continuously stream it in the backend, and you can populate a graph, real-time data analysis, and understand where are customers getting stuck the most. If they're getting stuck on a UI page, that's a good signal to your product managers to kind of think about that page differently. How can we break up that flow and collect less information or make it more interactive? The other thing, it could also be used for observability. If customers are just stuck at a particular page, you can use that signals and you can pass it to your customer success team and then develop automated triggers or notifications that reminds customers to finish their flow. Maybe they are just one step away from that final button that onboards them. So client-side metrics is very important during the onboarding flow. That gives you a good, it's how's my driving? That's essentially it is.
Great. So now that we know what to track, and we are tracking, how are we taking that information and making it meaningful, learning from it? So honing in specifically on the RFIs, like I touched on, requests for information. Like I said, dirty word, I know we all don't want to talk about it, but to some degree it's inevitable. Of the RFI information that we were seeing, we kind of honed in on the top 3 RFI reasons to mitigate. First and foremost, ownership structure, either unclear or lack thereof. Second, high-risk merchants. We were noticing a large amount of high-risk or higher-risk customers coming through the platform. How do we optimize their experience when we are needing additional information? And then missing ownership information, so missing UBO's IDs. And then what were some of the things that we did to address each of these 3 respectively? So first and foremost, in our flow, we included some helpful tips, like a little information button, some example docs and templates to include of what we were looking for ownership structure. Here, use this template. This is pre-populated and outlined. You just need to put in the percentages and company information. We started sharing our acceptable use policy on our website, so it's easily accessible. Our customers could now see what we would consider low, medium, high, or prohibited industries, and then being able to provide the additional information that we need for higher risk upfront. So really starting to kind of minimize those RFIs for anything that falls into that category. And then preloading ownership information from our central registry. We talked about this a lot, the customer experience, taking the information and knowledge we have from our different vendors and being able to provide that in the flow so that your customers aren't, to Meet's point, getting lost on the page or starting the process and then for some reason, maybe not finishing. So now let's focus on what's next. What are some of the things we're looking to the future to do? First and foremost, multi-entity onboarding. So a lot of our large enterprise customers have entities all around the world, and they have a pretty similar ownership structure, director information, et cetera. Rather than treating those as individual applications, sharing that information across the different entities and treating it kind of as one larger entity, if you will, one large company to provide a more seamless experience. Progressive onboarding is something we've made some pretty impressive strides on over the past few months. This essentially refers to a customer providing, limited or specific information for KYC based on their use case, based on a specific product. So let's say we have a customer that is coming on board to just do issuing, right? We may require less information, may be able to adjust our risk category if they're only issuing cards. And then let's say that customer decides now they want to do payouts with us, or now they want to leverage a different product offering. We put them through kind of a seamless, separate flow when it is triggered to us that they are interested in this next kind of product offering. Cross-border onboarding, this is important for us. We have a global vision. We want to be able to get to a point where we can onboard customers from any region, any country, anywhere. We've made some really great progress on this with our US licenses, being able to cross-border onboard Brazilian and Mexican entities. So trying to expand that footprint so that we really truly do have a global reach for our customers and onboarding our customers from anywhere. And then lastly, I think this is mostly just a hot topic in general in the space, AI, helping improve the straight-through processing, leveraging AI more in that capacity. You can see the announcement that we made at the end of last year by implementing generative AI. We cut KYC false positives in half. So continuing to streamline and optimize that, as well as having it assist with some of our more manual flows that I talked about in one of the other slides. How do we continue to minimize the amount of manual work needed for our higher risk customers? So just some things we were thinking about. Hope that was valuable for you guys. I really appreciate you coming in and listening to us today, and happy to take any questions now or one-on-one up front. Yeah.
So I can imagine, given that y'all built your own platform, right, to support all of this, you have to, and you talked about data sources. Can you talk about a little bit more of the selection process for some of the data sources in the KYC process, and how you leveraged the interoperability of those data sources? This data set, that data set might be different in different countries. So I'm assuming something like a hub and spoke model to support those kinds of connections. So how do you support that across the globe when you're trying to collect a similar kind of data in different countries? And do you normalize it, things like that?
Right, yeah, and that's where the data hydration layer comes in. So I think there are two places where this happens. So because we have multiple regions, and you're right, that the data is fragmented, the way businesses are formed in one country will be completely different. So it's important to have a data store which supports this metadata and unstructured data. So that way it's good, it's unstructured. And then we have the hydration layer, which does try to normalize at a certain level. But it's the reality, that's how the real world is modeled. It would always be different, so we don't want to forcefully try to normalize it and make it consistent. And this whole architecture, it understands that we can onboard in this many countries. And there is a place where it knows the country-specific validation.
You have to set exceptions for countries. Well, I mean, naturally, but
Yes.
I'm trying to be explicit. So you set exceptions for countries that we know.
Right.
So you have to give it the business logic.
That's right, that's correct. Yeah, thanks for that. That's really the complexity with working with different regions. And that's also the reason why we have kind of modeled each region service and have a layer above. So the top of the layers, they don't know anything about the regions. If tomorrow we go and change a vendor with a new vendor, none of the code above has to change. That's really the benefit of having this multi-layered. Great question.
I have a question for you. I was very pleased with the lessons learned. Kristen, if you can pop over there.
Yeah. Which slide, sorry?
The lessons learned.
Oh,
learnings.
right.
Yeah, the 3 stages. I assume you've not stopped learning.
Never stops.
What can we expect in V4?
V4 is where that's also covered in a few of the slides. What we are having right now, a difficulty is, and you realized is, the whole point of having a dynamic API schema is to avoid the documentation. So it's self-service. The API is intuitive. You understand what's needed, what's not. But so that's not gone yet. We still have a documentation that's really hard to understand. And imagine an engineer who doesn't have this background in different countries, and they have to go through that documentation. So how do we present that information in a self-documented way and keep it up to date and make the API easy to upgrade? So if I were to just break it down, how can we dynamically generate documentation? That's possible. With tools like AI, it's even more possible. So we already have our documentation, but it's not very developer-friendly, so that's one area of improvement. And the other area is the API's version changes, because that's very normal here, where regulations change, and from now onwards, for a specific country, we need additional document. Is that really a backward compatible change, or is that okay to release it in the same version? So that's another area where we are investing. Thanks.
So are you going to spin this out as its own offering, its own product?
Sorry, which one?
Are we going to spin it? Yeah.
Yes, that is, it's bundled. We don't have a KYC as a service in itself, but it's bundled. If you have to use Airwallex financial capabilities, you have to use Airwallex KYC.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but would you consider spinning it off at some point? I mean, y'all probably, I don't know.
Potential, probably, it's possible. Yeah, and that's how we have designed it. So if it could be its own product, standalone. Yeah, that's also the key takeaway. Like, think about it as a product. It's completely different engineering team product. It's not just one feature. Just like customer acquisition, it's a whole department. Onboarding is a whole department with its own product engineering ops teams.
So I guess if you think about developer documentation, why would you choose to just do it all in-house versus leverage platforms that could support developer documentation, SDKs, things like that?
Yeah, we do have some frameworks that we leverage for sure to speed up that process, and we are for the documentation. Right now we have this open API spec that we use for, and that's how we auto-generate the documentation. So we do use some third parties to generate the documentation developer, and there are some potential improvements that we can do, like enable chat GPT for just random questions, and it will find you to the documentation. So we already do that, but some of the pieces that we do want to control, that's still in-house, may change in future. All right, any other questions? Great. Thank you so much. We have a booth over there on the 5th floor, so if you want to chat one-on-one, happy to get. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.